Good morning. Continue summary conclusion of Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1443. Aleph Tov Mem Gimel. Continuing to learn about Achdus Hashem, Hashem Echad Nishma, which is so fundamental in all of Judaism, to the point that he called Krishma Klolos Kol HaMitzvahs. It encompasses and it personifies the very essence of all the mitzvahs, which is, as we learned earlier, Yichud Kudshe Bricha V'Shchinte, connecting the divine beyond existence with the divine within existence in all the levels, to the highest levels all the way down to the lowest levels. Ultimately, it's a full, complete, seamless interface between existence and God, which is, of course, the central theme of Ayin Beis and of Chassidus in general, of Torah in general. Like we said, Shema Echad, Shema Hashem Echad, Klolos Kol HaMitzvahs. In this itself, he explained what's the connection, specifically in breaking it down, that the halah of Krishma, which is we're elevating the world to Hashem Echad, that halah, in turn, using the words that he said, I'm reading at the bottom of page 1441. It says, Al Yedei to the highest levels. But then he went further, more than that. Krishma itself is not just halah, it's also hamshach. It's not just elevating existence, it's also drawing down the divine. And if you remember this central theme in all of Ayin Beis, beginning already in the end of volume 1, where he spoke about the two interpretations in Arimimcha Lekai HaMelech that we say in Ashrei. Arimimcha Lekai HaMelech Kamin Mamayel Lamata. Arimimcha, you're drawing from Remamus, Arimimcha, into Lekai HaMelech, into the divine within existence. Though he doesn't say it explicitly, but Arimimcha, you could say it's like Kutchebrichu, and Lekai HaMelech is like Shchinta. But in broader terms, Arimimcha is Keser, Remamus, transcendent. Elekai HaMelech, Elekim, and Melech, Malchus is already how the divine relates to existence. And then there's Mamata Lamaila, you're elevating Elekai HaMelech from the divine within existence, drawing it all the way up to recognizing that it's connected to the divine beyond existence, all the way to the highest levels. And that became a foundation of two different approaches, which in volume 2 in Ayin Beis, and I'm talking about the previous edition, he continued that this is the difference between Torah and Tefillah, or Tefillah and Torah, depending Matla Maila Mamayla Mata, and then went a long discussion of around close to 600 pages in Mamata Lamaila, and then on page 1350 in this volume 3, we go back to Mamayla Mata Torah, which is very much what we're learning now. But obviously, he keeps going back and forth and connecting both. So you see here, Shema, which initially seems like it's a tefillah, which is a mamat lamayla, and Itaka begins, it's halah. But then he says that in Shema itself, at the bottom of page 1441, Gam b'krishma gufiyesh b'chinis halah v'amshacha. Like he says, Yendua, that the Krishma, there's a yichud mamat lamayla, which is, he says, kol ha'mayrich be'echad, the extended contemplation on echad, that we, from existence, we come to extrapolate and we come to understand the divine, higher levels, basically elevating existence all the way into its highest sources in the divine will, even before the tzimtzum, and all the way to Shmoya Atzmi. And then there's Mamayla Mata Kadam Lichte, that you're crowning, or you're accepting God as the sovereign king over L'mayla Ulamato, L'dal Ruchas Elam, L'mayla Lamata, which is essentially what he's discussing here more at length, how everything is really a lakus. All of existence is simply divine energy. and not just divine energy on the highest levels, everything is alakus. To the point that he explained first that everything is alakus, like the koyach hamarkiv, that God is the force that connects and glues together all the different composites of existence, which is made up of parts. And then he went further and he said, from Elam Haza, Eina Rech Lecha Be'elam Haza, he said, a bir inyan, in this world, which creates a yesh ma'ayin hischatshus, a new reality, teaches us something new about God, that Oyer would not teach us. And what is that? That God is completely beyond. The non-existent state of the ayin is shlei be'erech to the existent state of the yesh, and it needs that energy consistently, perpetually, as he explained on page 1442. Then on the bottom of the page he said, and now, furthermore, once you know that Eina Reich Lecha Be'elam Haza, you also can from that derive that even Oyer, which on its own, Oyer reflects godliness. It's similar to godliness. That's what Oyer is. It's a reflection. It's a revelation. That even Oyer, Be'etzem, really is also infinitely distant from Atzmus. Because Atzmus is not defined by Oyer. But who teaches us that? Interestingly, it's the Yesh that does not reveal its source, that teaches us that about the Oyer that does reveal its source. That's the very interesting twist in Chassidus. And that teaches us that also Oyer is shalei be'erech, because the Eibush is not defined by being a moyer, and even when he plays the role of a moyer, in other words, he is the source, ultimately the source of everything, the source of life, he still moved the lagamri. So by human beings, you could find examples of that. But generally, when you manifest, let's say as a teacher, while you're a teacher, you are relating to your students. Even though you could say, be'etzem, the teacher really is removed from his students, even while he's teaching. Just as an example. But with Atzmus, for sure, that's the case. So even when he is emanating light, and he wants to express himself, still fundamentally remains moved to Lagamri, and that we learn from the Yesh, like he said, from Isavus, from the creation, or if you put in the language of Eiris and Kalim, from the Kalim, rooted in the Rishimu, which is rooted in the Koyach HaGvul, that teaches us this deeper level of Ein Oid. Not just Ein Zulasecha. Oid teaches you that God is great and God is beyond everything, but it's still, there's something commensurate about them. Because light is a revealer. And the Yesh reveals this infinite distance, as we learned. Okay, so this takes us all the way to page 1443, where Atzmus is completely beyond being a moir. Let's see here. And Dafka the Nevraim is Megala more about the personality of Atzmus, Muhusa Atzem, that is Metzius Matzmuse, built in Metzius Nimtza, whereas Oyer only tells us there is a source, but it doesn't tell us Eichu Ma, how he is, anything about him, and also for sure doesn't tell us about his personality. Muhusa Etzem. Okay, and also that's Oyer, and even the process of the creation of Oyer, of it coming into being, is also Einarech. It's also a quantum leap, because it's not b'derech mamela. That's the last thing we learned. Why is it not b'derech mamela? Because obviously it's ritzeni. God forbid to say that God has to give off light. The sun was created to give light. The God is not muchach to give light. And it's not b'derech echrachi. It's like the shemesh. Kim gilir ritzeni. And he gave the example, Eir HaNefesh, and told us to look in the Maimer Sheftim. And being that gilir ritzeni, v'hu be'etzem muhusi be'einarech l'gabe etzem. So that alone tells you that there's a leap. If something, the sun, to give off light, the leap is not such a big leap. That's what the sun is there for. So it's not a surprise. It's not like there's an option. With Atzmus, to give off light, it requires a leap, and that leap is one that is defined by God wanting it. Okay, so that's the Einarech, the leap of that. Let me just see to where we actually stopped. I think right over there, like a third of the way down on page 1443. Yeah, Uma Achar. Shugil Ritzeni Harizei Savas Mina Etzem. Sheisavas Ibederech Einarech. Being it's a Gilir Ritzeni, meaning it's a revelation that comes willingly, something that he wants, not that he has to. So that tells you there's a distance from the one who wants, because he could also not want, meaning that he's not defined by it. Since he's not defined by it, there's this quantum leap. So bottom line is, now we're understanding that even not just the yesh, but everything is infinitely distant from God. And what's the point? It's not just to teach us about his distance, it actually creates more unity. Because now you understand that God on God's terms is something we can appreciate. So we're coming to appreciate not just the God that relates to us, but also the God that's beyond us. And yet that very God beyond us chose to give off light and to reveal himself and to express himself and to create existence and for us to come into the scene and come and make a dir b'tachtenim. So the point is that ultimately this is not about removing God from us. It's actually engaging God, but now God on God's terms, not just God on our terms. The critical piece to keep in mind all the time. So the yichud is now all the way up to the highest levels, even the levels that are beyond existence. Again, that's another paradox, because you would think that the more God relates to us, the more we connect with him. But that's correct on a certain level. But then he connects to us on our terms. If you want to connect him on his terms, so yes, you could have a father or a parent or even spouses connecting to each other on each other's terms. But if you want to experience the magic or the mystique of the person, then you have to accept that there's something about them that's beyond you. Not that which relates to you. So a parent bends down to a child, yes, will play with the child on the child's terms. But can the child appreciate the parent on the parent's terms? There the child has to come to learn that there are things that are are beyond and transcend, and not something you can just contain or own. Like we talked many times about the Isayas Ponai. To see God's face, you can't just see him directly. You have to not look. It's through the deeper bittul of allowing yourself to absorb something, a reality that's beyond you, which is essentially all growth is really dependent on that. So someone will say, I want to own it all the time. That's the first half, is that you want it to integrate it into your life. But the second is, if you want to experience it in its true pristine form, you have to submit and surrender and allow yourself to be absorbed in it, and not the other way around. And that requires the bittul of accepting or receiving something beyond yourself. So you have both aspects. God as he relates to us and is integrated, and the God as is beyond. And that too can be integrated as we expand our channels and our containers and are able to experience higher states of consciousness, higher states of awareness, higher states of divine reality. Okay, so that sums up a bit what we learned. It also is somewhat of a summary of all of Ayin Beis, to be honest, because that's the whole central theme, the unity and the interface, both directions, from the bottom up, from the top down. And as we have learned and we will learn, bottom up is more on our terms, top down is more on God's terms, and ultimately, as we're going to learn, they come together, the Yichud Mamatlamayla and Yichud Mamayla, they too become united, because both of them ultimately, from God's point of view, are one. And so we come to a third level where both experiences all become one, and it's basically a lakus. Existence is a lakus. But we have to always remember, a lakus is not existence. God is always beyond existence. But existence is completely a lakus, whether we understand it from the bottom up or from the top down, or a combination of both. That's the central theme of Ayin Beis, and especially this section that we're learning now, as we come closer to winding down where the Rebbe Rashab concludes. But as we know, the Rebbe Rashab never finished writing Hemshech Ayin Beis. So a big part of what we're doing now is piecing together first what he does say, and then the sources of where it comes from, so be able to somewhat figure out how this would have concluded most likely. Okay. If anybody wants to ask anything about what I've just summed up, by all means, that will continue from here. Okay. So we are on the line, as I said, around a third of the way down on page 1443. The line that begins, Einarei chulu ube'emes, up to the word ube'emes. So it speaks about Eretz Gilead Ritzeni. We learned that all from the Yesh. And he's going to come and sum it all up in the next few sections till the end of this paragraph. He's going to tie it all together, what Krishma captures. and the avodah of Shema. She says like this, Ube'emes, and pages can be followed if you like, if you don't have the book, at ayinbeis.com. Ube'emes harei ha'oyer hu gam ken b'chinas mitzias dover. Now, going back to the oyer itself. Remember, there's a reason that God emanates oyer. As much as we've learned that it's infinitely distant from Atzmus, but it does have a feature that the Yesh doesn't have. It's a revealer. It expresses things. If God had only created a Yesh and no Oyer, what would reality be like? Yes, there would be a fundamental connection between the Yesh and Atzmus, but we'd never be able to be aware of it. There'd be no awareness, there'd be no consciousness. Because Oyer is consciousness. I mean, similar, just to put it more in Avodah Dika terms. Imagine you had a neshama down here on earth, and you even had mitzvahs. I'll go that far. We'll talk about that in a moment. But let's say you had mitzvahs, but you had no Torah. No Torah Oyer. So you'd have instructions, what to do, but can you be aware of godliness? There's no light. You live in a dark world. The neshama, as deeply as it's connected to Atzmus, is subject to all the concealments of a neshama beguf, as we see. Even with Torah and mitzvahs, we see how difficult it is. Imagine without Torah and mitzvahs. So what would we have? Neshama down below, yes, a yesh, all created by Atzmus, but no way back home. How do we retrace the steps? Imagine a person without intelligence and without emotions. So that's why I said mitzvahs. You can do actions like a servant. God says, put on tefillin, keep Shabbos, eat kosher. Fine. But can you get to a v'yadaita hayom v'shavesa levavecha? To know God, to feel God. Das alekei avicha v'avdua b'lev shalom. To know your Father, to serve Him with full heart. Avahaftas Hashem lekecha. You don't have giluyim. That's essentially a reality without Oyer. On the other hand, Oyer without the Yesh reveals an aspect of the divine, like we said, but not its mohus. You don't have the Atzmus part of it. So that's why you need both together. This is what I just stated is critical in all of Chassidus. In some Maimarim it spells it out, but many don't. Many Maimarim it doesn't spell it. It assumes that we know this. That's why I wanted to spell it out, because many people I know learning Chassidus are not always aware of this point, because you have to really understand what do we need these two. So when you think of it from Torah point of view, now if you take out mitzvahs from the picture, it becomes even darker. Mitzvahs at least tell you what to do. You just don't have illuminated reason behind it. You don't have a way of learning about God, understanding the reason of the mitzvahs, taimei ha-mitzvahs, kavanas ha-mitzvahs. So the neshama, as great as it is, remember a big part of what we've been learning is that the neshama comes down below, that greatness is concealed. Now, does that mean it's airtight? If hypothetically, but no Torah mitzvahs chas v'shalom, could the neshama have some awareness? Of course it could. That's why you find a person who, even if he's never learned Torah and never did mitzvahs, if I don't even know if that's hypothetically possible, because everybody does at least an act of kindness. Everybody has, but a human being by definition, the neshama does have consciousness and awareness, and that's why we could discover higher truths, but definitely not in a way of understanding God in the full sense of the word without God revealing Himself to us. So when we learn Torah, we learn Chassidus. Imagine you didn't have Ayin Beis. Imagine you didn't have Chassidus altogether. Imagine you didn't have Pnimius Torah and Torah in general. That would be life. So yes, a human would be able to somewhat reach somewhere because of our intelligence. But in truth, you could even argue without Oyer, there would be no intelligence. But even if you were to argue that a human being is created, like, you have animals have a form of intelligence. So you could argue that that comes from Oyer, not just Kalim. On the other hand, you could say that then the whole thing comes to say you need to have Oyer, but even if you don't say that, it's still going to be a limited amount. It's like before Matan Torah, even the Avos, they could only reach a certain point. It was Matan Torah and Torah that gave the people the ability to transform this world into a dira b'tachtenim, making it into a mishkan, as we learn in this this week's parsha. Okay, so now he's going back to explain what oir is. So he says like this. So he says, "Be'emes hare eru gamkem b'chinas mitzias davar." It's a mitzias davar. God created an entity called oir. It's true. It's far more sublime and far more ethereal and a revealer of the divine, as opposed to the yesh, which is a real yesh and mitzias. But even the oir is also mitzias davar. Hainu b'chinas mitzias oir. That's what it means. Oir means there's something there. You say light, that's an entity. Again, it's an entity that's only revealing, it doesn't have any identity of its own, but it's still something existent. So it's Metzias Oir. Va'atzmus shamuvdel be'erech min ha'ruchni u'min ha'gashmi. So he's going further to explain that Atzmus is completely removed from everything. Even from a Metzias, even from an ethereal Metzias like Oir. He's adding here more explanation and understanding how, from Atzmus' point of view, the Oir and the Yesh are exactly the same. So even though Oir is a revealer and a far more ethereal entity, but from Atzmus' point of view, since when is ethereal closer to Atzmus than something that's less ethereal? So he says, Atzmus ben haruchni u'min ha'gashmi. He's completely removed both from Ruchni, both from a sublime entity and from a Gashmi entity, from a physical entity. Just as the Gashmi is created with a quantum leap and a jump, so too the Ruchni, which is light or energy, is also created with a quantum leap, an infinite leap and jump. Now the addition here, even though we could have extrapolated from what he said earlier, but by spelling it out, it really drives the point home. It drives the point home that there's a point that I've made a number of times, that many people think that spirituality is a step closer to God than physicality. In a certain way, that's true, because a person who's completely consumed by materialism is generally egocentric, and it's all about me and my belongings and my possessions and so on. But remember, spirituality, and on the other hand, spirituality is a more transcendent state, but spirituality is also a state of being. You could also be, for example, spiritually arrogant. There are people who are very spiritual, and they feel they're superior to people who are materialistic. How's that possible if you're closer to God? Because spirituality is also an entity. Again, I'm not knocking, we're not saying it isn't a step closer, that a person who identifies with spirituality is going to be more refined than someone who's just materialistic, but it's not the end of the journey. That's why in Torah, there's one third step. It's called Hashem, Kedusha. Spirituality, Ruchnius, does not necessarily mean Kodesh. Kodesh is removed. When you get to the third level, God is not just spiritual versus physical. God is neither of the two. He's beyond both. So yes, Ruchnius is more of a Keli Telekus than Gashmius, because it's just by nature, a person, let's say when they access their soul, the soul is more conducive to a divine experience. But it's not because it is synonymous with a divine experience, it's because it is more bottle. Ruchnius is more bottle than Gashmius. But at the end of the day, Ruchnius is also an entity. Now this is a big chiddush and a very powerful statement, because it tells you about something which is the ultimate goal, like the machlekes between the Rambam and the Ramban, whether the ultimate reward will be Tchias HaMesim, the Shamas Begufim, souls inside bodies. The Ramban says that. The Rambam says no. There'll be Tchias HaMesim temporarily, because the body needs to be rewarded for its part in doing Avodas Hashem in this world. But ultimately, a body is inferior to a soul. The Rambam says that explicitly. How could a body ever appreciate divine and spiritual realities like the soul does? So the ultimate goal is Gan Eden, meaning a neshama without a guf. Chassidus paskins and Kabbalah paskins, as the Tzemach Tzedek brings in places, that Alter Rebbe always brings the Shittas HaRamban, that ultimate reward is the soul inside of a body. So you think to yourself, well, so one second, but the Rambam's argument seems to be a very logical one. A soul at the end of the day is far more sublime, far more conducive to spiritual experiences than the body is. Fact is that Neshama in Gan Eden, as he even says in Tanya, that even the greatest tzaddik, no matter how much Ava V'yira he has on earth, Ava V'yira in heaven without a body is always going to be higher, because he doesn't have the encumbrance and all the limitations of a physical body, which has its limitations. Because the answer is, because the Rambam is speaking from the logical point of view, spirituality is, yes, indeed, superior to materialism. However, from God's Atzmus point of view, they're both equal. And the Yesh HaGashmi actually reveals aspects of Atzmus that even Oyer HaRuchnis and the Neshama doesn't reveal. The Guf has, in other words, something to contribute just as much as the Neshama has. In addition to what we're learning here, that they're both infinitely distant. And from that point of view, Neshama and Guf both together can ultimately be the reward, because we're not just talking about higher states of consciousness, which indeed the Neshama does have. We're also talking about experiencing something that's beyond consciousness and beyond even Giluyim of Oyer. So point being is that Oyer has many qualities and we need it, as I just elaborated, but there's also the other side of it, that Atzmus is ultimately beyond both, like he's just said. And they're both Ein Arech. V'im Kain. So what do we take away from this? V'im Kain. And if that's the case, that the Oyer, the Gashmi and the Ruchni are equally, infinitely distant from Atzmus, V'im Kain, B'hadeya Elyena, She'b'chinas Atzmus Ein Sof Baruch Hu. From God's perspective, Deya Elyena means like Das Elyon. From the perspective of the birds, the God's perspective from Atzmus Ein Sof, Gamba Eru B'chinas Ein. The Bittul of also Eir is Ein. Remember, we learned before Ein was like Ein Arech Lecha, was the Yesh. Eir, he said, was Ein Zulasecha. Because Eir on its own knows that its source is much higher than it, but it still has something in common. I am your light. I'm reflecting you. Yesh doesn't have that. So Yesh is only saying that God is completely beyond. But now, from God's point of view, the Bittul of Ein is also there in Eir, because Eir really is infinitely as distant as the Yeshes. That's what he's saying here. V'hainu shakolu rak b'chinas Atzmus. From that perspective, everything is only Atzmus. The Ein milvade. And there's absolutely nothing besides him. So from Eir's point of view, you don't say that. Eir's point of view says, yes, God is the only God, but once you want me to exist, Eir, I'm reflecting who you are. So sometimes the expression is, I am nothing without you, but once you want me, I am here with you. Meaning I do exist from Eir's point of view. From Atzmus' point of view, even when you're here, you're not here. Because from Atzmus' point of view, everything is infinitely distant and beyond. So you wrap your head around that, but that's a very fundamental and another piece. And we're dealing here with talking about highest levels of yichud here. So
can you take your question?
Not middle of my sentence. Let me finish the whole point, and then I'll take questions. Especially dealing with such a sublime topic. So in that context, so we have here different perspectives, and obviously they're all real, they're all true, everyone on their level, like I say many times, depending on your level of avodah, where you stand. So there is a reality where you could say, I exist, and God exists with me, which means I know I exist, and I know God is sustaining me, giving me life, giving me sustenance, food, oxygen, blessings, family, health, etc., etc. But that's not a bittul b'mitzias. That means you exist and you recognize the Creator that has created you and continues to create you. And then as we climb and we grow, we come to realize that God is beyond us. And then we come to realize that God is even beyond being beyond. So it's a whole journey that really is endless. Excuse me. So even though he's speaking here several levels, 1 level, 2 levels, 3 levels, the truth is it's really infinite levels when you start breaking it down to each one of us commensurate to where we are. But in overall terms, it's this context of we have here Yesh, Nevroim, We have Ur, as I explained at length what that is, Torah Ur and so on. And then we have the Atzmus, which is beyond both. And as I said, all these levels are necessary, everyone, depending where you are. So, with that, let me just see. Im came by day Atzmus, Ein Eid Mulvade. Okay, we'll stop here. He's still going to add some more points because the question is, does Ur feel this? I mentioned Ur feels that that God is obviously, that Ur is completely bottle and nullified in the presence of, and nullified in context of its source. Just like sunlight. What's sunlight compared to the sun? But, as he said, there is still a sea is called Ur. So the question is, does Ur feel these higher levels? And we'll talk about that shortly. So here's a good place to pause. I'll be happy to take any questions.
So, first of all, thank you for that great summary. Really put everything in its context. So I understand this notion that or itself is just essentially a creation. It's not any closer to Atzmus than Kalim. I understand that. At the same time, and this maybe is a paradox, but the neshama itself is a called mamash, and the neshama, as I understand it, is or. So there's something about us as our neshamas that is itself a piece of God, and somehow that seems closer to the Father than the Kali. The Kali is not a spark of God. I mean, I understand everything is Eino Mil Vado, and what exactly, okay, the Kali is sourced in Koach HaGvul and the Helma Atzmi, so that you can't say that's because you can say, okay, well, it's tough. That's pretty close to God too. So maybe that's your response, but somehow it seems like
So are you
being,
asking me why do we need Torah if you have a neshama?
God forbid, no, not at all. You just said light isn't any closer to Osmos than Kaylee. Then
Well,
I
the
think
Rebbe Rashab said that, yes.
okay, and I'm just wondering if I'm a piece of,
But,
I'm a piece of,
he didn't say the word neshama. He didn't say the word neshama here. He's talking about Ur.
but
So
isn't
you're
that's my
you're equating Ur and neshama, right? That's
that
what
was
you're
a
doing.
premise. That was yes, that was a premise I stated.
Okay,
Is
that's
that
why I
not
asked you. But
is that
I
not true?
equated Ur with Torah Ur.
Okay, well, it's an interesting
So,
passing, like we
so
pass
the
each other in
answer,
the night.
so
Yeah.
the answer is very straightforward. If you recall, a big operative example that he's been using here is eyesight, right? And he said the difference between the eye in as it manifests in the vessel is though an eye can see, but in the dark, an eye needs a siyua, an outside light to shine. And that was the example for neshama lamata. So as much as the neshama is chelik elakam mimal mamish, as much as it's part of the divine, it's subject to concealment. And as I said, you don't even need proof. Just look at our lives. If the neshama was not subject to concealment, we wouldn't have all the battles that we have. Just access your neshama when you wake up, and it should eliminate your animal soul and your yetzer hara and all your temptations. And it doesn't happen because the neshama, with all its power, does come down. Neshama shenasata b'tahirihi, ata barasa, ata yitzarta, ata nefachta bi, to the point that even needs shmira, ata mishamra b'kirbi, needs protection. So neshama has an element of ur in it, correct? But it's an ur that, like ur nishtalshlus, that goes through ishtalshlus and gets concealed in the kalim, namely here the body and the animal soul, and that's why the eye needs an outside light. So that's why the neshama needs support from the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, Teira Ur, Ner Mitzvah for that matter, Malachim, as we learned, and we will learn soon at length, more at length. And the neshama needs all that because it needs to help. So even though Ner Hashem Nishma Sadam, the neshama is a Ner, as we learned, and especially the Maimer HaMagbil L'Sheves in Torah from the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe. But that Ner is called a Ner. It's not called it's called Ner, number one. And number two, it does subject to concealment. So it needs Torah and mitzvahs to help ignite it, or if you want to fan its flames, to reveal the So that's as far as the neshama goes. Once it does that, then we learn that neshama elevates to a point that reveals its source that's even higher than Torah and mitzvahs. Like he said in the Helam Atzmi, in Shmaya Atzmi. And that's like the light of that's like the eye, the Etzem HaNefesh. The Etzem HaNefesh, the eye does not need an outside light. It's only when the eye comes, it's only when the vision, the power of Koyach Hariyah comes into the physical eye, it's only when the neshama comes down below that it needs that. But ultimately, like we learned La'aseh Love, the body itself will actually sustain the soul. That's when, let me put it this way. The neshama, as it came down below and deals with the and subject to all the concealments, will ultimately elevate and actually contribute and be mashpia into Torah and elevate even Torah and mitzvahs, even though the Torah and mitzvahs elevated the neshama for our lifetimes and throughout history. So point being is that that the neshama really straddles both the er and the yesh, because the neshama on one hand is ner Hashem, on the other hand it does come down into our body and is subject to those concealments. So neshama is unique because it ultimately is going to be the force that brings it all together. But when you break it down, really, in the context of what is really Torah is called That's why I associate it with that. But the truth is, like he's saying here, that on one hand, does reveal, and that's why it's so vital. On the other hand, we come to learn that is equally distant from Atzmus as the Yesh, as the Gashmi is. So therefore, that we learn actually from the Gashmi. That's what the body teaches, or you could say the soul as it comes down into a body teaches that even comes to recognize that it's really infinitely distant from Atzmus. So I hope that helps, but that's part of the whole picture of how all this works. And each piece contributes its role, and altogether it comes together in a very elegant and eloquent way where they all complement each other. And that's a very big part of the discussion that we've been learning. Which I actually just wrote about in my which I wrote about in my essay about the role of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, what's the role of Ner Mitzvah, and what's the role of Torah and Tefillah, of course, works together with the Neshama, Shema, Hashem Echad. So it all comes together, and as I said, they all complement each other. You have to just recognize each piece as it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, the bottom line is that everything was, even the Torah, was without the neshama. The Torah is not having what to do. The purpose is that the neshama down here should this is the nisaver. Of course, down here you need the Torah, you need all of these things, which is even higher than the neshama down here. But the root, the shaylash is that the neshama, I think, this is part of the Atzmus, and everything, the Torah, and everything is in order. The neshama should be able to come down, and this is what fulfills the purpose. I'm correct?
Yeah. Overall, yeah. But keep in mind, when we say Bereshis b'shvil Yisrael b'shvil HaTorah, and he said also Shnei Dvarim Kadmu La'elam, Neshamas and Torah, so they really work hand in hand. But between Neshamas and Torah itself, as you just said, Neshamas ultimately are the highest. Yes, but remember the difference ultimately in Neshamas and Torah is Neshamas, in some way, because they're higher, they come down lower. So they get more concealed. Torah never assumes the concealments that the neshama does. Torah, even when it comes down lamata, ain't a makabel tuma, cannot be impurified. Torah always remains kei dvari ka'esh. It always remains like fire. So that's its maila, but it's also demonstrates that it's unable to really come down below like a neshama does. So they work hand in hand. It's a real partnership. And as we learned, if you learn at length, when he spoke about Torah and Neshamas earlier, depending which level of Neshama, is it the Neshama down below or the Neshama above? And also, when he spoke about that in Giluyim, Torah is higher, but in Etzem, Neshama is higher. Now, I'm going to explain this more when we get there, but I'll just say this. I haven't said it before at length. With the neshama, you have to keep in mind that the neshama has the neshama and the guf. So when you say neshama beguf, the neshama itself, compared to the guf, is more like a compared to a keli. But because the neshama is mislabish beguf, it has an element that it relates to the yesh. That's why there's an expression about the neshama, elakush shanasi yesh. I don't know if you ever learned this. It's like elakush shanasi yesh. But is that the guf? No, it's the neshama that relates to the guf. So keep in mind that neshama compared to the guf is like Oyer and Keli, even though neshama compared to Torah, because it goes into the guf, you can say neshama has more like a Keli element to it. So neshama is like almost itself, it's Ner Hashem Nishmasodim, it's a flame, it's an Oyer. But because it comes into the guf and so relates and engages with the body, it has an element also of that is connected to the etzem down below. And that's why you find the neshama, sometimes you see neshama is a gilui, oir, ner Hashem nishmasodam. And then we said it's rooted in helam ha'atzmi. What does that mean, that it's rooted in helam ha'atzmi? You'd say the guf is rooted in helam ha'atzmi. The keli is because the neshama ultimately is going to relate to the keli and is going to manifest in the keli. This needs more explanation, and I've not found the Chassidus explicitly explaining it. That's why I'm beginning to explain it, but I will discuss this more at length later, because it's an important piece when we start talking about the neshama nezunis min haguf, and he's going to talk about it here too in the next few lines.
This is what you said, Reb Simon, that the Atzmus, compared to Atzmus, even the oil, is equal to any other thing. The Atzmus is being defined Davke in the lowest of the lowest, which is in the guf. So lechatchila, before Torah even, mikodam lemi Yisrael kodnu, the neshama is above everything, but the purpose it should come down to the lowest
and
of
even
the lowest.
let's put it this way, and even the helam ha'atzmi of the neshama and its deepest levels is revealed only when the neshama comes down to the guf and nefesh habamis. That's why it's the oil, the shemen of the chokhmah of the nefesh habamis that really creates the flame. It's not the wick. Even though the nefesh halikis is the wick, if you recall, that's inserted in the oil, but it's the wick that elevates the flame, but it's the oil rather, and transforms it, but it's the oil that really feeds the major part of the flame. Take away oil, the wick will burn out very quickly. So it's interesting twist here as well. Just like the neshama basically contributes to Torah Eir, it's the guf and nefesh habamis that contributes to the neshama to reveal its root in the helam ha'atzmi, and then that reveals it all in Torah Eir. But the other way around as well, Torah Eir is the force that gives strength for the neshama to do all of this, because the neshama on its own can contemplate on Hashem Echad and affect the animal soul, but it doesn't come close to when it brings Torah into the picture. So everything is feeding each other both ways. I'm actually in the middle of writing all this right now in the next chapter of my essay.
Installment?
But this
installment. Installment is the right word.
This is exactly what you said, that the neshama, the Atzmus, is being expressed davke in the guf, davke in the lowest.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay, it's good, very good stuff. Everybody following?
But I had a question, Rabbi, because before you were talking about how we wouldn't have that. Avraham Avinu was able to reach that point. And how did he reach that point? In other words, did Hashem?
He didn't reach the highest point because he didn't have
he understood that there was something more, and that was without Torah. Like he was able to grasp something without it. So he just is just this incredible.
No. The answer is I alluded to before. First of all, being that a soul does have consciousness. I said that. Even without Torah, the soul does have awareness and can reach certain places. Secondly, it says Avram fulfilled the whole Torah before it was given. He just didn't have the power from above, that it wasn't given to him formally. But he did know of Torah and he studied Torah. That's number two. And number three, he had, let's say, the mitzvah of bris milah. The circumcision was an actual mitzvah God gave him. So he did have power from above as well. There's a few things that are at work here. There's his effort. I mean, just let's make it very practical. Any person on earth who's really dedicated to try to find the truth, even if they're living on an island and they were never exposed to Torah, they can come to certain levels of awareness because they do have a soul and they do have intelligence. And if they get their ego out of the way and their self-interest, I can see someone reaching quite impressive heights. The question is how high they can go, how much can you figure out on your own? So obviously you figure out a certain amount of your own. You could discover the artist within the art, and you could even discover that God is beyond being an artist. But obviously if you study and you learn and you have a master, a mentor, a teacher, and you continue to grow and you have the tools called prayer and mitzvahs and Torah, there's no question it's going to propel you to a whole other level. It would be the difference like there were geniuses, mathematical geniuses, scientific geniuses that sat in their little hut in India and discovered all kinds of brilliant ideas. They never went to school. But that would not be, someone would say, okay, let's advocate not having any education, because how much better they would have done had they also had some. I mean, they could have also done worse. Sometimes formal education can mess you up. But my point being is that there is a capacity for a human to reach certain heights, even without so-called the siyua. However you explain it, whether the soul has in it some element of Torah, even if it's not aware of it, like we all learned the Torah in our mother's womb before and then might forget, or because the soul has some divine consciousness, however you explain it, but that's how I would.
Thank you.
I would not say that because the neshama learned Torah before it's born, that means that the Torah was there already. But the neshama is before even the mother is pregnant. The neshama in the roots is above all of this. This is like we spoke before, that this is the expression of the Atzmus. So this is having an effect in all the levels. I think so.
I don't see the contradiction. The fact is, the Alter Rebbe explains the neshama studying Torah in its mother's womb does have a super conscious effect on us, even if we're not aware of it.
Yeah, you're right. But
I'm not talking about Avraham Avinu. I don't know if in his mother's womb he learned the whole Torah. It doesn't say that. But he definitely says he fulfilled the Torah even before it was given. So he had. But that's another discussion. It's a question of how much a person can reach on their own, how much, and God does reveal himself ultimately to Avram Avinu. Let's not forget that. His name is changed. So even though Avram did reach certain places, then God responded and began the journey. As I said, it's always a journey. It all depends where you're at, how much you achieve on your own, and how much you just be very practical about it in your own life. Some things you come to on your own, and some things you learn from others. And sometimes you need one to lead you to the next. It's a constant process. Okay. And any other questions? So now he continues. So now he continues and it says like this. So now that we said from Atzmus' point of view, the Oid is also on a level of Ein Oid. Everything is Atzmus, like he says. Hakol rak b'chinas Atzmus ve'ein Oid milvadei. But what about the Oid? How much is the Oid aware of its own Bittul? She says, Rak sha'achshav. And he goes back to similar what he said earlier before about the body. Now he's talking about Oir. Sha'achshav ein ze nirgish ba'Oir. This level of Einaid, in other words, the infinite distance of Oir from Atzmus, and that everything is only Atzmus. And Oir is equal to Yesh. The Ruchni is equal to Gashmi. Today, the Oir does not feel that. In other words, it does feel Bittul, but it doesn't feel it to that extent. And he adds in the parentheses, Shim haya nirgash kain ba'er, because if indeed the Oir did feel that level of Bittul, haya b'chinas lei mamish, it wouldn't have any mitzias altogether. It would be literally like a non-existent if the Oir actually felt it. And the fact is, we want Oir to be an entity because it has a role to play. It can't be completely nullified. The Yesh doesn't have this issue because the Yesh, it's concealed from the Yesh in the first place. Like we said, the whole purpose of the Yesh and the Gashmi is that it doesn't reveal its source. That's why it tells us, that's why we learn from it how infinite the source is. But Oir is a revealer. So if Oir were to have this level of awareness, it would be so encompassed and absorbed in its source, like Atzmus, nothing there, it couldn't even function. It couldn't even like leave the source, so to speak, to play a role. He doesn't say exactly what I just said right now, but I'm trying to explain what he means by it, at least my understanding of it. But he says, now the Rebbe Rashab continues, but nevertheless, because Oir is so dedicated and so bottle to its source in a revealed conscious way, so there is a me'ein zeh of this bittul in the Oir. Me'ein. Not completely, because completely then it would be non-existent. Me'ein zeh hu ba'Oir hakol ba'atzmusei. So there's Oir we learn that's outside of Atzmusei. That's like the light kavyachol that is already extending and beginning to relate to existence. Or not existence to outside of Atzmus, to the Oir that begins to envision existence, to be more precise. So there, that Oir does not have this level of Bittul. But the Oir kol b'atzmusei, if you recall, we learned that there's a Oir that's still encompassed, whether it's in Yechelis Atzmus, or it's the Oir kol b'atzmusei, there are different levels. But regardless, it's the Oir that's completely within its source. Shahu inyan efes biltecha. That's what we say, efes biltecha, commission is bar le'il. We learned that earlier, I believe, on page 1387. So there's a level in Oir that does feel the ein oid, so to speak, but it's still not completely ein oid. It's efes biltecha. Efes is higher than ayin, he explained there. So basically, there are three levels here. There's the Oir outside of Atzmusei that is Oir Batul Telakus, but it's a Metzias, and it doesn't feel the complete Ein Areich or the Ein Oid, as he said here. There's the Oir Kol Batzmusei that does feel it, but it's still Oir Kol Batzmusei, and then there's how Atzmus sees it, which is completely, everything is equal there. So this is in Oir itself, three levels that you can identify from here. Ula Osid, but in the future, this highest level of how Atzmus sees it, the Oir will also feel it. The Yebchinas Einaid. And then the Oir will be in that level of Einaid, the ultimate seamless, absolutely no duality at all, totally one Atzmus, absolutely clear. Before, he spoke about the difference in the Yesh, that today the Yesh doesn't feel its source, which is obvious. And L'Osed Lavia will feel it. V'nigla Kved Hashem, like he said, V'ro kol Basar Yagdav, at the bottom of 1442. So that's a different experience. That's the Yesh, which has a very different reality than the Oir. Oir, on the other hand, is a revealer and does feel Elikus, but it doesn't feel it in the deepest sense of how Atzmus sees it. It feels it like, in a way you could say like Atzilus. Atzilus is Elikus, but it's still Atzilus, not Atzmus. And the Asad Lave, it'll so permeate not just the yesh, but even the oir will also sense this highest level of ein arech, or what we call ein oid. So this is a very, as you can see, pretty profound piece, because it's talking here about not just the yesh, it's talking about even oir itself. But ultimately, as you can tell, what we're leading to, that ultimately leading to Hashem Echad, a total seamless achdus. There's only Atzmus. But there's no way you can reach that without going through these stages. Because first you have to see there's existence, then there's the source of existence, there's the oir that energizes existence, so there's kalim, there's oiris, it's a whole part of the whole ishtalshlus. And then you come to realize slowly the infinite distance. And again, paradoxically, it's the keli or the yesh that reveals it in the oir. And then even deeper, that the oir ultimately can even experience the highest level of ein arech, which is fascinating, because that the yesh experiences it can make more sense, because the yesh never felt godliness in the first place. So all it is a reflection of a divine that's completely beyond. The oir, on the other hand, you could say its spiritual identity can be a contradiction to the Atzmus part, because the spiritual identity is like, I'm a spiritual force, I'm Ruchni. So for a Ruchni to come to realize that it's equal to the Gashmi, in a way is a bigger chiddush than for the Gashmi to realize it's equal with the Ruchni, as you could imagine. So a lot of interesting twists and turns here in this whole plot when you start thinking about it.
That is very powerful.
Yeah. In other words, that a Baal Tshuva feels, because he was distant, that he's connected, and he realizes that I'm even a higher level than a tzaddik is one thing. But a tzaddik is already close to God, to feel a level that even your closeness is completely equal to someone who's distant is a bigger Mesiras Nefesh in a way.
There's a paradox, because when we say infinitely distant, we mean, because Enod Milvado, because Atzmus is everything ultimately, when we say infinitely distant, we mean sort of infinitely concealed, if you will. But Lasi Lavo, the Atzmus is going to permeate everything. So it's kind of a paradox when you say, well, on the one hand, infinitely distant. You're saying, well, Lasi Lavo and the Gula Shlema you're saying, well, no, it's not going to be infinitely distant, but it's still light, it's still a keli, it's still different than Atzmus itself. So is Atzmus going to be intimately close, or it's going to be infinitely far? It's your answer is going to be, it's going to be both, and I don't understand.
So you shared with me how when you spoke to your wife and told her we get closer by appreciating each other's mystique. Why is it? So you answered it yourself.
Yeah. All right. Beautiful. Wow. Thank you. Beautiful. Wow.
In other words, the point of distance and closeness has to be reevaluated. You know, we see distance as being, okay, it's beyond me. But the truth is, if God is truly infinitely distant and you can come to appreciate that in a very intimate way, you're actually more intimate with him than if you were able to understand it all.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Rabbi. Wow. Well, you really flip that on me. Thank you. I'll never forget that. Thank you.
Yeah.
In a good way. You understand I meant in a good way.
No, I understand. And you will, it'll enhance your marriage.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Remember, the key is because God wants to have a relationship with us even on his deepest levels. It would have been a lot simpler where God would simply say, there's parts of me that are off limits, and that's it. You don't go there. Period. But we're entering, it's like almost saying, it's counterintuitive, because we human beings want control. I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean we like to feel we own it. To come to a point where you say, you have to surrender. You cannot own it if you want to own it, so to speak. If you really want to be part of it, you're going to have to let go of your need to understand it, to appreciate it. Just be. Just be, a state of being. Just allow yourself to enter the water and become one with water. Instead of trying to figure out what you're getting from it, that's very, it's actually quite, for many people, it's disconcerting even. because it's opposite of everything they experience in life.
Yeah.
You know, we want to wait a second, I want to own it. I want to
I want to be in control. I don't feel comfortable if I'm not in control. You're saying, well, then you can't be close. You can't be as close to God as possible if you want to
No,
control
so right.
it.
So you'll have what you can control, but beyond that, you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you see this often. Sometimes I was just literally talking to someone yesterday. He said to me, what do you do with someone? You know, some of you brought up this similar question, who just doesn't, it simply doesn't get it. There comes a point where they just don't appreciate something that is more sublime or more ruchnisdik or more deeper chassidus or whatever it may be. And I said, look, you know, a kop kemenish darufstal, which means you can't implant a mind into someone. If somebody refuses or is unable for whatever reason, their ego or their limited capacity, or they don't want to go out of their comfort zone, whatever it is, that's it. They've reached their limit and they've written their own script. You know, I've said to some, you know, it sometimes sounds a little insulting, but the truth is sometimes you tell someone, look, what can I tell you? You know, this is where you want to go, as far as you want to go. You don't want to go further into the forest or deeper down the rabbit hole. That's your call. But if you want to go, you're going to have to let go of certain things. And letting go is not always easy.
Very profound.
It could be very vulnerable and you feel very naked, like, you know, like, what am I holding on to if I let go, you know? But that's where you need trust. And also that's why you need stages. You can't jump to B'chol Maidecha, like I always point out, if you don't go through B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshecha.
It's so interesting because honestly, Lahavdil, just for a moment, it's really interesting insight. Like there are other religions, and they chop certain truths about Elikus. They fail to put the pieces together. They fail to draw the lines. But say lahavdil, huge lahavdil. But like Buddhism, for example, they're all about getting the me out of the way, letting go, so to speak. And in that place, in that space where you let go, somehow you'll find a more, I don't know how to put it, sublime place, which is true. That part they got. The problem is they only care about the me. It's the irony. They say get the me out of the way, but they really are only focused on the me because they don't think there's anything else. So, anyways, but they've got that part right, I think.
You
I don't
said
know.
it very right, Rabbi Yitzchok. To get out the me of the way, this is the me, their me. The Baal Shem Tov said so one time about there was a big galach. Everyone said that he's unbelievable and I saw him. The Baal Shem Tov did not agree. So this guy went and he was by this galach for a few days. It was just, he never saw such a him. He could, just before he left, the galach asked him, so what's your opinion about my Achnas?
There you go.
That's the idea.
Sure.
This is what Reb Simon is telling us. And you should thank Reb Simon for giving this answer because there are some good people that they know Torah, they love Torah, but they're telling you they don't relate to these things. They relate only to facts. You get.
We can't hear Rabbi Teichel.
Oh,
Okay, we'll stop here. We'll stop here. Even though I was going to read a few more lines, but I think it's better to go slower. Explain it more tomorrow. I'll start before the word ve'efsher. And yeah, if you mark the pages as the very, I mean, everything's fundamental, but some pages stand out. These pages we're learning now are quite, I would say, very central to an understanding of central theme as well as fundamental principles in Chassidus. So I'll stop here by the Efsher. Let's stop the recording. Middle of page